I'm BrianVee at Whywework, and today I had the great pleasure of speaking with Coach Michael Taylor. When you think of coach, you think of someone who is leading, and Mr. Michael Taylor is leading. He is an author of 8 books, working on several more. He is a motivational speaker. He not only motivates people, but he gets down to the heart of issues and showing people forgiveness, love, and gratitude. I very much enjoyed this conversation today, and may you glean something from it as we listen to my conversation with Coach Michael Taylor. I'm BrianVee, and this is Why We Work. And I have the great pleasure of speaking with Coach Michael Taylor. Good day, fine sir.
Hello, Brian. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. I just said you must have some things going on if you have coach in front of your name, because anyone who has ever played a sport and even has some admiration for maybe their kids coach or something, for you to have coach, you must have some real things going on.
Well, here's the thing behind that word, coach. There's a wonderful book out called The Passion Test. And the intention of the book is to help you identify that which you are truly passionate about. And after I did that test, what I came to find was I love teaching. I absolutely love teaching how to do things. And I'm an author, written 8 books, so that's a form of teaching. So when I started my company, I needed a tagline, I needed a brand. And teacher Michael Taylor doesn't sound nearly as cool as Coach Michael Taylor. so I'm in that life coaching space, and that's why I use the term Coach Michael Taylor.
I love it. I really love it. And knowing a little bit about you from your bio, and again, I say it, you and I, we met through LinkedIn. I think it's a great resource, but going through some of the things that you are doing and have done, I think you hold the name rather well. So
It's a great,
coach,
it's a great brand, and it's an interesting. What I find really interesting is most of my life, all of my friends, for whatever reason, generally call me my first and last name, Michael Taylor.
Michael Taylor.
Michael Taylor. Michael. I don't know why that stuck, but most people have always called me Michael Taylor. And so when I came up with the brand Coach Michael Taylor, it just kind of fit, because
Still
everyone,
fits.
yeah, it just still kind of fit. Coach Michael Taylor.
It adds, like, it seems Michael Taylor is one syllable, but you got like
Exactly.
another syllable on there. There's a few, but it seems like one. No, it works. It works really well.
Yeah.
Coach, can you bring us back? I know you just mentioned you're an author of 8 books. You have a podcast going. You're a motivational speaker. As you opened up with me a few moments ago, you're trying to get through the noise and resting on the shore settlement of what's to come after all this noise. But before you got here, how did it all start? When did you begin working? When did you get your first job? How old were you? What was your motivation then?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I've known that I wanted to be an entrepreneur since I was 10 years old. When I was 10 years old, this is a conversation I actually had with my grandpa. I'll never forget. I walked up to him and I said, Grandpa, when I grow up, I'm going to be rich. And he asked me, how are you going to do that? I said, I'm going to own my own company. He said, wow, that's a great goal to have. He says, now, if you're going to be rich, he said, I'm going to tell you 2 things you have to learn to be rich. He says, number one, if you're going to be rich, you have to learn to think like rich people. Excuse me. He said, the only difference between rich people and poor people is how they think. And secondly, he said, if you're going to be rich, you have to learn to listen. He said, because rich people will tell you how they got rich. It's your responsibility to learn from them so that you can become rich. And it is those 2 lessons that have really stuck with me my entire life. Now, when I was 14 years old, I was walking to school, and I happened to overhear this conversation between this owner of this company and his mechanic. And they were screaming and cursing and fighting because the mechanic didn't want to clean the floors. He said, my job is to fix it was a motorcycle shop. He said, my job is to fix the darn motorcycle. I'm not here to clean up. Well, I heard that as I was walking by. So I walk into the store. I talked to the owner. I said, hey, man, I heard the conversation. I said, guess what? I can clean your floor for you.
At 14 years old.
At 14 years old.
At 14 years old. Sir, I can clean your floor.
Yeah, I said, if you hire me, I can clean your floor. He says, well, how much will you charge? I said, I have no idea, but here's the thing. I said, let me clean your garage, and then you pay me what you think it's worth.
At 14.
I'm 14 years old. So I had to go to school. I told him I'd come back after school to clean his garage. Well, I come back, and by the time I finished cleaning that garage, you could have had dinner on that floor. It was so clean. So the guy looked at me, and he kind of smiled. Was really impressed. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll pay you $5 an hour. Now, guess what? This was 1974. Minimum wage was $1.60 an hour. This guy's paying me $5 an hour. I'm 14 years old now. I only worked a couple hours, right? But he had 3 friends that also owned garages. So guess what? I now ended up having 3 other clients at 14. So that was my first jump into entrepreneurship. Now, a couple of other things that I love. Number one, I love music. So when I got to high school, I started my own company being a DJ. I bought my own equipment. I'd go around doing parties and dances and proms and so forth. In high school, I was making a ton of money. I also loved installing car stereos. That was a passion of mine. I had a $400 car with a $1,200 stereo in it. And so I would install car stereos for my friends, and they would tell their friends. And I had a steady stream of customers coming in. So I've always had this passion for entrepreneurship, and that's how it all began.
I think I'm still stuck on that you were 14 in 1970 something. You look like you're about 35.
I'll be 60 this year.
Well, you're doing well for yourself. So you're talking about the motivation you had, or even the desire you had to be rich, but where did that come from? Like, is there someone that you knew, something that you experienced? What was this drive coming from, especially from 10 years old, right?
Well, here's the thing. First of all, I believe every human being has a divine purpose. There's something that we show up with that's in our DNA. And if we're blessed enough to figure out what that is, life becomes magical. So I was born in the inner city projects of Corpus Christi, Texas, to a single mom with 6 kids. And we were basically the poster children for poverty back in the 60s. And you'll hear people sometimes say that when they were young, they didn't realize they were poor. I realized we were poor, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. And I remember having conversations with my mom. I said, Mom, whatever it takes, I'm going to get out of this situation. I'm going to buy you a house, all those things we hear people say. I said, I'm going to get out of this situation. I am not going to be poor. And my mom used to tell me, she says, Michael, if you want something badly enough, there is no one or no thing that can keep you from having it except yourself. So if you want to get out of this situation, the first thing you got to do is you got to use your mind. She says, you're smart. She says, you got to have a positive mental attitude. And she says, if you want it badly enough, you can do it. So that foundation, I believe, is what started this whole entrepreneurial purpose fulfillment for me, because I believe, once again, that there is a divine energy in the universe. You can call it whatever you want to call it. You can call it God, you can call it universe, you can call it whatever you want, but there is something that we as human beings have access to, that when we tap into it, nothing is impossible. And fortunately for me, I was blessed to be able to tap into that. And it is what has allowed me to accomplish the things that I've accomplished so far.
Did you ever buy a house for your mom?
Not yet. Still working on it.
The thing is, you brought me way back, because I grew up not with 6 or 5 brothers and sisters, but when we were younger, I was in the poorest part of my hometown, And I always said to my mom, I want to, you know, be successful enough to buy you a home. Probably said a couple other things, but I always said buy a home. My mom passed away this February. And that now I find that, you know, I feel a little bit like I fell short there a little bit, but it resonates with me that you had the experience growing up and you're tapping into something that you believe is bigger than yourself.
Well, but here's the beautiful part about that, though. You know, when we make those intentions, you know, and, you know, we always love our moms. We want to do great things for our moms. But see, my mom, like most moms, is very special and unique. And she is the reason I am who I am. Again, my mom, single parent, 6 kids, poverty, the whole 9 yards. But you know, I really thought about this, and I can't remember a single time when I heard my mom complain about anything, despite our situation. She had this sense of optimism and possibility that is, I guess it's, if there's a resiliency gene, she passed it on to me. And I'm so grateful for that. And so even though I haven't been able to buy her the house yet,
Mm-hmm.
I have done some things that, from her own words, basically fulfills the fulfillment that she would have received if she bought the house. For example, when I was in the 11th grade, I dropped out of high school. I dropped out of high school because I convinced myself that I could get rich selling vacuum cleaners. Now,
You
see,
were optimistic then too.
absolutely. So I go to the seminar, right? And this guy, and you know, I'm in one of these motivational seminars and these multi-level marketing, sell a vacuum cleaner, make all this money. I just knew I could do it, right? Well, bad choice. But what I learned from that, even though I never sold a single vacuum cleaner, I learned that I was willing to take risk. And as an entrepreneur, obviously, that's a huge part of that, taking risk. But I knew intuitively, somehow, I was going to make it. So when I dropped out of high school, couldn't find a job for about a year, but I still maintained this positive attitude. Fortunately for me, I landed a job with a building supply center at 19. Climbed the corporate ladder pretty quickly. As a matter of fact, I became the youngest manager in the history of this particular company, and one of only 2 Black managers ever in an 87-year history of the company. And so when I became manager and I bought my first house, I remember inviting my mom over and saying, "Mom, I made it." And the look on her face and the feeling that she gave me when she embraced me and said, "Baby, I'm so proud of you." Knowing where I'd come from, and at the beginning when I first started working for that company, she didn't believe that I would be able to make manager because, number one, I was Black. Number two, because I only had an 11th grade education. She said, "Nobody's going to pay you that kind of money without a degree." I said, "Mom, trust me. I know what I'm doing." I knew that I could do it. So I climbed the corporate ladder, and again, I became manager at 22. But just seeing her face, the pride when she walked into my house for the very first time, it's wasn't buying her a house, but I guarantee the feeling was the same. Her being so proud of me.
So congratulations too. We just bought our house like 3 weeks ago, and I would have loved to have shown my mom. It's one of those things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I just so proud of that she was able to see that. And not to mention the fact that whenever I write a book, you know, my mom's just all over the place with her friends, you know, bragging and so forth. And here's a really amazing story. My mom is part of this organization called the Eastern Stars. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a female fraternity type thing where women get together and they do conferences and stuff like that. Well, she's a part of this. Well, she went to one of these conferences, and there's, you know, probably 1,500 people in this conference. And there's a lady there that she's a good friend of. They've been friends for years. And so for some reason or somehow they started having this conversation. She's a college professor. And so they're having this conversation, and the college professor tells my mom about this amazing book that she's reading for Black men. And so my mom asked her, what's the title of the book? And she said, Shattering Black Male Stereotypes. And my mom went, my son wrote that book. And the lady's like, no way. She said, yeah. She said, that's my son. And I remember when she got back and she calls me on the phone and she's laughing and she's like, I can't believe that actually.
What a wonderful thing, eh?
Yeah, that's very cool.
So how did you go from manager into, more of your role now? So after dropping out of high school, getting promoted, and then you're starting to find you're not starting, but you're getting into your groove of starting to write. Did you write before grade 11?
Here's the amazing story. So at the age of 23, I'm living the American dream, right? I got the house, the wife, the 2.5 kids and all of that. By the age of 29, my American dream turned into the American nightmare. I went through a divorce, a bankruptcy, a foreclosure, a deep state of depression. I was actually homeless for 2 years living out of a car. And so during the darkest period of my life, I received a miracle. I was sitting up late one night because I was too depressed to sleep. And I remember sitting at the edge of my bed, looking across the room at my bookshelf, when I happened to notice that every book on my bookshelf had something to do with getting rich or making money. Now, remember what I said about me wanting to be an entrepreneur when I was 10 years old? Well, all my books on my bookshelf was what my grandfather taught me about listening. He taught me to listen, and that's how I listened, by reading these books. So I'm looking at these books, noticing that every book had something to do with getting rich and making money. And all of a sudden, this question just popped in my head. Michael, what if you took all the energy and effort you've used in trying to get rich and simply figure out how to be happy? That simple single question literally changed and saved my life in an instant. When I asked myself that question, something in me shifted. I couldn't explain it in words, but all of a sudden my depression lifted, and I had this amazing clarity that I was going to be able to rebuild my life, and it was going to become extraordinary. Intuitively, I just knew it. It was a transcendent experience that had nothing to do with the intellect. It was completely spiritual. Something just shifted. And so I stopped reading books on getting rich and making money, and I started reading books on philosophy and psychology and spirituality and metaphysics and personal development. And I went on this amazing journey of transformation. And so after a few years, because it took a few years, I started rebuilding my life. And I got really involved with the Anthony Robbins motivational movement, if you will. Walking on the hot coals and doing neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. And so again, I started putting my life back together. And so things were going well, but there was something missing that I couldn't put my finger on. And it's interesting because, again, I had always been motivated. So motivation wasn't the problem. Yeah. And so here I am with Anthony Robbins, who was primarily motivating, but there was something deeper that I couldn't figure out. And then I read a book by a guy named John Bradshaw. And in this book, he was talking about emotional healing. And he said the key to emotional healing was creating an interpersonal bridge with another human being. And he said the fastest way to create that bridge was through some sort of therapy in which you are able to connect with another human being to allow you to emotionally heal. And when I read that, I realized that there was something there for me that I needed to look at. And so I gained the courage to go to therapy. And during therapy, I learned that I had an extremely abusive childhood. As a matter of fact, if you take the worst childhood you could imagine and multiply by 10, that was my childhood. Now, I mentioned that I was born in an inner city projects with 6 kids with my mom. But when I was 6 years old, my mom had to take me to live with my dad for a while because one of my oldest sisters got really sick. And so I went to live with my dad, who I really didn't remember because he had left when I was really young.
Yep.
And we moved in with his mother, who was obviously my grandmother. And she was literally the grandmother from hell. And she literally hated me. She did. She just hated me. Number one, anytime she would say anything bad about my mom, I would defend my mom, and she would get just going through these violent rages, right? So anyway, when I'm with this therapist and I'm talking about some of the trauma that I went through as a child, she asked me, she says, well, Mike, how are you doing? Well, I had created this defense mechanism, and that defense mechanism was everything's great. I hid behind this mask of Mr. Nice Guy, everything's great. But beneath that, I was really in a lot of pain. And this therapist helped me move through and heal a lot of that pain. And in doing that inner work, that healing work, I figured out what was missing. Because when I was doing all that motivational stuff, I really hadn't tapped into my heart and my feelings. And so what I was able to do through therapy was to connect the dots. The dots was I needed to heal some stuff to be happy. Because as I had mentioned in my question about stop reading books about getting rich and just figure out how to be happy, that was the goal. And as a result of going through therapy and some other processes, I was able to accomplish that goal, which is to simply be happy. And so in doing that work and getting happy and being joyful, I said, I've got to share the lessons that I've learned with others. And that's when I started writing in my late 30s. I started writing books.
You didn't start writing until your 30s.
Yep. And I didn't even know that I was a writer. I never knew I was a writer. And here's the interesting thing. The primary reason I started writing books was because I had joined Toastmasters as a public speaker. And I fell in love with public speaking. And I was trying to figure out how to get speaking gigs. Well, one way to get speaking gigs is to be an author. So I wrote a book to get speaking, gigs.
That's pretty amazing. I'm just thinking of, our paths are similar, I think. It's kind of heart-wrenching to go to, say, a parent's home where you're not wanted, and you have someone also who hates you. And as a 6-year-old child, having nowhere else to go and being hated at the same time, and not knowing the world that's out there and how to get out of that situation, it's debilitating. It's encapsulating. It's it's like a jail, right? You don't know how to escape. And there's no wonder that you wouldn't. I think the word would be love, right? You had the love from your mother, and then going to the place that you couldn't make that connection. You wanted to be happy. You had some unresolved issues based on the lack of love that no one there gave you, and they gave you everything else but. And for it to be a relationship from hell, I can only imagine. So I appreciate you coming out of that. And, those are things that, it's like losing someone or memories from the past. You'll still remember those things, but it depends on where you're guided towards. So I really appreciate you being able to come up out of that. What was your, you go ahead.
Well, here's the thing, again, and for the listeners who are watching this, because we've all experienced trauma and adversity in our lives. It's just part of life. And again, I have been through some of the darkest periods that anyone can go through. But I come back to my belief, and that belief is purpose. As difficult and as painful because I was there for 7 years, from 6 to 13 was when I went through what I call my 7 years of hell.
Mhm.
And that's what it was. And again, as painful and as difficult as it was, what I can now see in retrospect as a result of all the deep work that I've done in healing and growing, what I can see is the perfection, even in that adversity. There's a wonderful book out by a guy named Tim Kelly, called True Purpose. And in the book, he talks about what he calls the sacred wound. And what he says is that each of us as human beings will experience something that in some way shapes our destiny in a way.
Mhm.
And he says, it doesn't have to be a traumatic physical experience. He says, for some people, that sacred wound could be your father telling you that they're disappointed in you.
Mhm.
But what happens is something happens, and then we make a decision that there's something wrong with us, that maybe we're not lovable. And he said that wound, that sacred wound, if we can figure out what that wound is and heal that wound, it will release us from all the pain and all the disconnection we felt, but it will open us up to understanding the divine purpose in that wound. Because in that wound, as a result of that wound, I became extremely independent. I became my defense mechanism was my way of coping was by being smart. From first grade to seventh grade, when I was there in that
Yeah.
7 years of hell,
Mhm.
I was a complete straight A student. Absolutely brilliant.
Mhm.
Because my mom said the way to get back to her was by doing good in school. So that sacred wound of me being separated from my mom, which psychologists will tell you that's where abandonment issues start. Well, for me, that's where the abandonment issue started for me, because in that moment that my mom left me, I made a decision that people who love you leave you. And it was that decision for a long time, that was driving all my relationships. And it was the reason why I couldn't fully connect with others in relationships. It was the reason why I went through a divorce, because deep down inside, I believed that people who loved you would leave you. And so what I would do is I would do everything in my power to keep people in relationship with me. And the term we would use is I was very codependent. I didn't know how to put my emotional needs first, because I was always trying to take care of others' needs to keep them in relationship with me. And so by healing that sacred wound, by getting in touch with the negative emotions that were trapped inside of me through therapy, which I talked about earlier, it freed me from that pain. It freed me from that shame. It awakened in me that divine part of me that, and I'm going to get a little woo-woo here on you,
Mhm.
but that part of me that knew that all of that pain was there for a purpose. That those 7 years of hell was part of the divine plan. And so when I came to that understanding, and as I came to that understanding, what I recognize now is that this divine energy, this divine intelligence that I'm talking about is love. Okay. And so my belief is that there is but one presence and one power in the universe. There's no negative energy in the universe. There's no negative beings that causes us to do bad things. There's just this energy of love. And when we connect to that energy of love, then we can see things through a whole different lens. And so for me, that lens of love allows me to see those 7 years of hell, as painful as they were, through the lens of love, through the lens of this loving presence saying, I know this is difficult right now, but there's a purpose, there's a reason behind it. So you just hold on, and eventually you'll see why you had to go through this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the beginning of our conversation, I mentioned that I believe in the breakdown breakthrough principle.
Mm-hmm.
And I really believe that because it's a universal law, I believe. And so for me, my breakdown period, those 7 years of hell, my breakdown period where my going through the divorce and bankruptcy and foreclosure and living out of a car for 2.5 years, those are some pretty major breakdowns in life, right? But what I can say with absolute certainty is that if I had to do my life over again, I wouldn't change a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I left out any part of it, I wouldn't be who I am today. I wouldn't be the man that I am today. I wouldn't be able to do the things that I do today. I wouldn't have the compassion for others that I have today.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I really believe that as we look at society as a whole, we're in that breakdown breakthrough period, or we're in that breakdown period, which is part of the larger divine breakdown breakthrough principle. Our country and our world is in major breakdown right now. And it's really uncomfortable for a lot of people. But I'm absolutely certain that this breakdown is preparing us as a species for a major breakthrough.
Coach Michael, in your world of love, which I agree with, where is forgiveness? Where do you place forgiveness in this equation of how you're able to look back and how we should look back and in the world today? Where is forgiveness in all of this?
Well, if you'll accept my belief that as human beings, we're energetic beings, we're spiritual beings, we're spiritual beings having a human experience, not human beings having a spiritual experience. So at our core, at our essence, is spiritual. If we're holding on to any negative energy, be it hate, anger, frustration, negativity, if we're holding on to any of those negative energies, internally, it hurts. it keeps us separate from the love that we truly are.
Mm.
So when we learn to forgive, learning to give allows us to release any negative energy that we may be holding on towards someone or something else. So forgiveness is never about the other person. Forgiveness is always about us releasing negative energy that's inside of us. And in doing so, we become free. Now, I don't remember where I read this, but it's a pretty powerful statement. And so when I was in those 7 years of hell that I was talking about with my grandmother, I was actually sexually abused by a male family friend.
Mm.
And it was that abuse that sort of set all of my insecurities in motion. And so when I started going through this healing process, I knew I had to forgive him, not for him, but for me. And so through a series of processes, I allowed myself to feel the hurt, the anger, the sadness as a result of his violation. And someone once said that you know you've truly healed when you can go to the person that hurt you and say thank you. Now, I never had a chance to go to this guy and say that, and I probably never would have said it to him.
Mm-hmm.
But I am able to see those events and in a spiritual way say thank you. Mm-hmm. Because those painful experiences actually brought me a gift. And I know that may be difficult to grasp, especially when you start talking about child sexual abuse. It's a horrific thing. But again, if we can see it through a spiritual lens, there was a gift in it for me. And so learning to forgive and letting go of all the negative energy is the way that we become free. Because Wayne Dyer, you know Wayne Dyer?
I do not.
Yeah, Wayne Dyer is an author who, for years, I read his work, and he passed away a couple of years ago. And Wayne Dyer is the guy who I would consider my most important mentor when it comes to how I think, the way that I think. Because when I was in my early 20s, I started reading Wayne Dyer's books. And one of the things he said was, as a human being, you have within you the capacity to do anything any other human being has ever done. And if it hasn't been done, you can be the first. Now, Wayne Dyer happened to be a white guy that I just admired. But when I read his books, as a person who happens to be black, there was something in his words that I really, really resonated with. And I realized that it had nothing to do with my ethnicity. What he was talking about was the deeper essence of who I am as a human being. And it was that mindset that has allowed me to far exceed what society says a young black guy with only an 11th grade education could accomplish. Okay? So these lessons that I've learned, that's where I got the lesson about when you can go to someone that hurts you and say, thank you, you've healed from it. But Wayne Dyer said this, he says, have you ever known someone that dies from a snake bite? And most people say, sure, there's people who die from snake bites. He says, no. He says, no one has ever died from a snake bite. He says, you die from the poison. Not the bite. Mm-hmm. And so healing is a way of getting that poison out of you. It's a way of releasing the poisons. The initial bite obviously hurts, but that's not what kills you. It's the poison. So holding on to negative energy is poison. And that's why it's so important to forgive. It allows you to release the poisons.
I heard someone once say, he was referring to marriage, but just the key to marriage is forgiveness. But I'm certain that can stretch for any relationship. The key to any relationship is forgiveness.
Yeah, I agree. And I've been blissfully married for the past 18 years. Happily married been together for 20 years. But like I said, it's been an interesting journey to say the least. But through some really deep emotional, psychological, and spiritual healing, I get that. And to me, the cool thing about relationships, once you deal with your own stuff, is how you can get to a place where forgiveness almost doesn't happen, because here's the thing. Why do people fight in relationships? There's a simple reason why we fight in relationships. And we fight because of the need to be right. Mm-hmm. It's that simple.
True. Yeah.
We fight because of the need to be right. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I learned from Wayne Dyer is the willingness and the ability to not have to be right, right? So when my wife does something that just irritates the shit out of me, just like, well, see, I don't have to be right about how I feel about that to go to her and say, blah, 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 you shouldn't have done that, The one thing we don't want to do is deny how we feel, right? So if she does something that upsets me, I can authentically say how that felt for me, what was true for me, without attacking her, without having to be right to prove my point, but just by being honest with how it landed for me and what I'm experiencing. When you're able to do that in relationships are amazing.
They're hard, but with forgiveness, it makes forgiveness easier too, right? When
Absolutely.
you don't always have to be right. So Coach, when you started to write and you were in Toastmasters and you started the incline to your career, what was the most difficult part into getting the motivation into this new form of life that you were venturing into?
The most difficult part. My struggle, and I still have this struggle today, actually. My struggle is my inability and unwillingness to ask for help. It's one of the most powerful lessons that I've learned, and I still struggle with it today, to this day.
Is that a like a pride issue, or is it you don't want to spend the money, you want to just
Has nothing to
control it
do with
all?
there's just a part of me that, and again, I can trace it back to 6 years old, having to take care of and defend myself.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a part of me that is always in that mode of I can handle anything that comes my way. Okay. So that's a gift and a curse at the same time, because if I don't allow others to be in support of me, then I can't truly create true connection. And so to this day, I still work on seeking support. I still work on being vulnerable and just being okay with me. It's not there was a time in my life when there was a lot of shame that drove that. The shame's no longer there, but I can't acknowledge that that's still an issue that I work with. It's something that, again, I'm not ashamed of anymore, doesn't really disrupt my life. But if we're talking about growth, it's an area that I'm always aware of. And so I now have a support system, some amazing men and women in my life who, when I catch myself in that space, I can call them up and say, hey, I just want to talk to you about this, which, several years ago, was something that I couldn't do. But that was the real struggle that I had at the beginning, simply being willing to seek support.
What would you say is your expertise now? What is the thing that brings you most joy in your ability to do, whether it's helping men or women, relationships, speaking? What is the thing that it really drives you to keep on going?
Well, as I mentioned, I believe everyone has a divine purpose. And one of our purposes is to find out and discover what our gifts are. Because we all have unique gifts and talents within us if we're willing to tap into them. Two of my gifts, writing and speaking. I'm absolutely certain that these are gifts from something greater than myself. My ability to write. I've written a book a year for the past 5 years. Currently writing 3 books simultaneously. I have this gift. It's a gift. When I'm speaking on stage, there is something that takes over me that I can't explain in words. It's like I get out of the way, and this energy, this intelligence takes over, and I just light up on a stage, and I'm able to communicate ideas and stories and concepts in ways that people get it, and it supports them in transforming their lives. And so my tagline is empowering others to transform their lives from the inside out. Because I believe everything begins in mind. And if we can change our mindsets, we can change our lives. And we can't change our lives until we change the inner processes, the thoughts, the beliefs that we have about who we are in the world around us. And so, again, my gift is the ability to share information with others that supports them in transforming their lives.
You mentioned a few times, and I think it's a touchy subject, but being Black or I'm being white or however things are defined, I think I read that you speak to anyone, but also help empowering Black men to see their purpose. In your experience, would you say, because you're saying getting through the noise, that, how much similarity is there between Black and white in us having the same problems and need the same encouragement and need the same motivation, the same mentors? How much, in your experience, what are you finding that's it's similar or it's not similar, and there's a difference, and we should be up in arms. What are you finding?
Well, first and foremost, we have to understand, or let me just put it this way, my belief, this is Michael Taylor's belief,
Yeah.
that there are three worldviews. You familiar with Ken Wilber by any chance? Ken Wilber, he's a philosopher guy, really deep thinker guy. And he said there are three worldviews. There's what he calls an ethnocentric worldview, there's a human-centric worldview, and there's a cosmocentric worldview. Most people see the world through an ethnocentric worldview, which means they believe that human beings are somehow different and separate from each other because of ethnicity. Okay, that's an ethnocentric worldview. You have others who have a human-centric worldview, meaning they understand and recognize that all human beings are the same and we're all intimately connected with one another. And then you have a cosmocentric worldview, which says everything is connected to each other. Everything is connected together. Mm-hmm. Now, I choose to see the world through a cosmic view, okay? Cosmocentric worldview. Because I recognize that as human beings, again, we are spiritual beings having a human experience versus human beings having a spiritual experience. With that being said, I also believe, once again, when we start talking about purpose, that there's a reason that I am a Black man. There's a divine purpose in it, because here in America, we still have a media that constantly bombards us with negative stories and images about Black men. And there's a belief that we are somehow different. And unfortunately, in this culture, there are systems that are still in place that, as Black people, we have not achieved a level of equality because of our judicial system, because of our media. So there's still lots of challenges out there. And so this current event that happened, the George Floyd event, in which the young guy was killed by policemen for, this cop had his knee on this guy's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and the guy dies basically on live television.
Tragic.
Yeah, tragic. And as tragic as it was, there is a awakening, I believe, that's occurring, because that incident, I believe, has cracked open the heart of America in a whole new way, especially for white people, because I think there was this sense that here in America, because we had chosen a Black president, that racism sort of just disappeared. But obviously, racism hasn't disappeared. Mm-hmm. It's still a huge issue. It's huge. But the optimist in me says, I see the world through what I'll call an evolutionary worldview. Because there's this intelligence that created everything. It knows exactly what it's doing. And so if you really pull back and look at it from an evolutionary worldview, when it comes to race, as mentioned, I'll be 60 this year. So I remember the civil rights movement very clearly. I remember in elementary school, I remember having race riots between Black and white. I remember sitting at home watching a little black and white TV, and my grandparents and the family be watching TV. And whenever and if ever you saw a Black person on television, it was a huge event. It was like, oh my gosh, Sidney Poitier's on TV. So they're calling each other on the phone, making sure that you're watching TV because there's a Black person on TV in a positive light. Mm. So think about that. And so in my short lifetime, I've seen this country go from not allowing Black people to vote to choosing a Black person to lead the country. I've seen this country go from not having Black people on television to now having Black people own television stations. So I see the world through a very positive lens, evolutionary lens, but at the same time, I'm not blind. We still have challenges in our world in regards to race. But ultimately, if you want to get really philosophical, think about this in a spiritual context. There's a woman named Barbara Marx Hubbard who wrote an amazing book called Conscious Evolution. And in the book, she talks about the idea, the theory, that human beings are still evolving. Now, obviously, we're not evolving physically, but we're evolving in consciousness. And so each generation, I believe, each generation has a higher and higher level of consciousness. And so she predicts that human beings are evolving to what she calls Homo universalis. Homo universalis meaning one human. Okay? So, taking that idea, when I look at the world and all the crap that's going on, if this is true, which I believe it is, the trajectory that we're on as a species is actually really positive. Because if you look at race, if you look at gender, now I'm speaking from the context of America, and the progress that we've made as a country from, you know, it hadn't been 60 years or so when women couldn't vote. You remember that? So now in this country, if you look at the influx of women in all areas of our society now, for example, there's more women graduating from college than men these days. There's more women in the workforce than men these days here in America. So I believe these are all positive trends, because what we're coming to understand is we're moving past this idea that as human beings, we're different and separate from each other. We're evolving to the understanding that we're all one. We're all connected intimately. We have a media that its job is to sensationalize and cause fear. And it's what drives the overwhelming majority of how people think. But then there are people like myself who inject a different point of view. And so by injecting this different point of view, you can now start shifting the consciousness of the planet. And so I'm a firm believer that one person can change the world. And so my job is to take my gifts and talents and use them in some way to make the world a better place. And in doing so, I fulfill my divine purpose and I make the world a little bit better.
How would you speak to me versus, say, another Black man in the perspective that I should carry out in an encouraging sort of way? What, like, if there's someone, I'm 43, if someone else, a Black man, and I were just together, separate us in different rooms, how would you encourage me to recognize the challenges, but also being optimistic about an evolutionary universalism that we can all aspire to together?
Well, see, I wouldn't speak to you any differently than I would speak to a Black man.
And that's what I figured. That's what I was hoping you were getting at.
Yeah, so I wouldn't speak to you any differently. And so I could sit in a room with you, Brian, and we would say, or I could say, hey, Brian, how do you feel about this? And I could create a space in which you and I could have a conversation about anything. Number one, because I'm not going to be defensive. I'm not going to be attacking you, judging you, criticizing you. I'm going to be connecting with you. I'm going to give you a space to be authentic in you sharing your beliefs and your feelings, okay? That's a really difficult thing to do because, especially with race, it's a highly charged topic. We have ideas and beliefs about what, our beliefs about race. But from my worldview, when I see Brian, I see a white guy, obviously, physically. But what I know is that's not who you really are. What I know is that your core is a spiritual being that I'm connecting to. And I can connect to that. I can relate to you. I can share with you pretty much anything because I don't see you as different. Now, my question to you might be, when you see racial injustice, how does that make you feel? Now, most people will go to what they think. Well, I've heard people say, for example, when George Floyd was killed, people were bringing up the fact that he had a bad past, right? So they're thinking about things versus feeling the compassion of watching a person die.
Yeah.
Right. So if we can get out of the thinking and get into the feeling, that's where we connect.
Yeah. Rather than trying to justify something, saying, this is a fellow human, and there was no other words than to say it was tragic and it should never happen.
Yeah. So the question becomes, as a group, collectively, white people, are you willing to feel the pain that we as Black people feel on a daily basis as a result of our skin color? See, there's a woman, I can't remember her name. She happens to be a white woman. She talks about race a lot. And she asked this question in her seminars or whatever with white people. She says, I want you to raise your hand. I want you to raise your hand if you are willing to move through the world as a Black person. And I'm paraphrasing. That's not exactly the words that she used. She says, so raise your hand if you would be comfortable moving through the world as a Black person. And then she says, nobody ever raises their hand. She says, why is that? Because deep down, as a white person, you're not going to experience the world the same way. So collectively, as human beings, we recognize if you're white, you may not be able to empathize with being Black, but you can have compassion and sympathy and recognize that, okay, I can see that there are differences. Black people are treated differently. Now, here's another thing that I will interject, and I think this is sort of not the way to go about it. So there's a lot of talk right now about white privilege. I'm sure you've heard that term, right?
Yep.
I don't think white people should feel guilty about white privilege. You shouldn't feel guilty about your ethnicity. You shouldn't feel guilty about something your grandparents might have done. You shouldn't feel shame or guilt about that. You should embrace your ethnicity, but you also, once again, should have compassion for people who don't look like you and recognize that who you are simply by the color of your skin automatically makes your life a little simpler. It's true, but you shouldn't feel bad about that.
It's a challenge. It's like, a double-edged sword. However you slice it, someone's not going to be happy. Someone's not going to be comfortable. It's as you said, it's a charged topic. And I think there's almost, this is my, it's almost like you say a hypothetical. Some people don't answer hypothetical questions because it's a hypothetical question. And for me I think you used the word to have empathy, right? To have compassion, or it's hard to have empathy, but to have compassion, like I would change my shoes. I would change my shoes with someone, but we can't do it. And that's the part that it makes it so difficult, right? It just like, I wish I could do this. If I could do this, I mean, there's some things that, you know, a good man will lay down his life for another. Um, if we could do it, and all things would, I think there would be a lineup of people, a sufficient, you know, if one person could do it, right? And I think there was, to lay down their life for the many. And that would be enough. In asking a human, asking a person to do so, I think there would be a sufficient amount of people to do so, but we can't. So we have to live, you know, and work on it. And we have to engage with one another, and we have to connect, and we have to keep doing and be, and as you're saying, remind, whether it's a white privilege or the difficulties happening to Black people in, you know, around the world, or in America, as you're referring. I'm from Canada, but, you know, I see it, right? I first came to Korea, and they didn't hire people who were not white and spoke English. It's not just Korea, it's China, Japan, all of those countries. And I'm like, why? And now things have changed, right? Because I know there are other cultures and other ethnicities in Korea and in Japan. So things have changed. I'm talking 15 years. But I was aware of it. And like, so really, I didn't have any more talent than anyone else. I happened to have a piece of paper that said I finished something, and that was it. And so it's so hard to switch the shoes, but I think we do definitely have to work on it and understand and acknowledge there is something going on. But as you're saying, as the optimist, is to get through this noise and acknowledge it, and don't, you know, the media that it pounds on you, pounds on someone, and it makes people bitter, especially if there's no forgiveness, especially if there's no love, if there's no sincerity, there's no compassion, and people just another reason to, you know, be hateful. So it's so hard, but it can't be pushed to the side.
Well, again, let's go back to the breakdown breakthrough principle. Breakdown is hard. It's tough. And right now, people are really, really uncomfortable. There's a guy named Emmanuel Acho, former NFL player, Black guy. Amazing guy. And he does a show. It's an online show now that it's called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. Okay. And he's bringing on celebrities and athletes and so forth. And he's having these really difficult conversations in a context in which people are going, oh, you know, I never thought about it. Just like you and I are having right now. He's doing this on a national stage, and it's really powerful. And so, are you familiar with Matthew Mcconaughey, the actor? Matthew Mcconaughey. Yeah, Matthew McConaughey, he was one of the first guys on the show. And he said, Matthew, so he says, welcome to Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. So you get to share or ask any question that you may have. And so they had this amazing conversation about, you know, his beliefs as a white guy versus Emmanuel's beliefs as a Black guy. And it's a really moving show. He had a series or an episode in which, you know, he brought on some interracial couples, talking about the challenges of interracial couples and how, you know, the interracial couples, how they have to, you know, navigate the differences in cultures and so forth. But the show is a huge, huge success right now. And it's really engaging people in conversations in ways that we really haven't seen before. Mm-hmm. And once again, another reason for my optimism, that show and the conversation that he's having. And again, from my perspective, what I'm seeing collectively as a species, a human species, humanity is simply waking up. Because this divine intelligence that set all this in motion, it knows exactly what it's doing. And it's intelligent enough to build a system that I believe ultimately will create heaven on earth. I believe that without question. That's the trajectory that we're on. Now, will that happen in my lifetime? Probably not. But the trajectory that we're on as a species tells me that we are still evolving. We are still waking up. We are starting to understand the oneness and unity in humanity. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we willing first and foremost to do our inner work, to heal whatever scars we may be carrying around, which would keep us from being able to connect intimately with others? Because when we do our inner work and tap into the essence of who we are, what we'll find is that we are no different.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
we'll stop seeing people differently, because that difference is just a belief. It's just a thought that you think over and over again. So if we can change that belief that we're different, we change the world.
Coach Michael, what do you find yourself doing on a daily basis? How does your days look?
Well, I'm a firm believer in meditation and silence.
Mm-hmm.
And so every morning begins with just that, silence. I'll spend 15, 20 minutes in complete silence, just sort of just getting centered and just being at peace with myself. And then there's a guy named Mike Dooley, Dooley, Mike Dooley. And he sends out this daily email, and it's called Notes from the Universe. And every email, it's like, imagine having a conversation with the universe. Now, you can exchange the word God with universe if you like, but he sends out these notes from the universe, and they're always thought-provoking, insightful, and sometimes hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
But I spend a lot of time in quiet contemplation with the message that he sends out, because there's something in his messages that really, really resonate with me. So I'll spend a little time just there in contemplation about whatever that message might be for today. The message may come across and it may say, note from the universe, and it may just say, you rock.
Yep.
So it's a positive thing. So I put myself in a mindset of positivity and gratitude. Then I'll just kind of go and check emails or whatever, get that out of the way. And depending on if I've got a speaking engagement or not, I'll get prepared for that. And once the day is over, my wife comes home, and I love on her a little bit, and kiss her and hug her and count my blessings for having her in my life, and go to sleep and have a good night.
So you're a full-time writer, a full-time speaker.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you spend your days preparing for that. Coach, a couple more questions. You've been very gracious to me to give me your time. What advice do you have for people starting in work, people who might be disappointed with their job, someone's in between jobs? What sort of advice would you give to them to give them sort of a motivation, if a flicker of a motivation and some positive thought for their day?
If you'll buy into my idea, my concept that as human beings, we are energetic beings. And are you familiar with the law of attraction?
Yes.
Okay. So if we're energetic beings, which I believe we are, then we don't attract what we want. We attract who we are. So if I'm in a job that I hate, and I really hate it, what kind of energy am I going to be emitting? It's going to be it's going to be negative energy. Okay. So guess what? As I'm sending out that negative energy, everything around me, it's going to attract that which is like it, that negative energy. So when I go to work, I'm probably going to attract a boss that is just a pain in the butt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If I go to work with that kind of energy, my coworkers aren't going to be the friendliest people around. Why? Because I'm attracting to me that which I am. So no matter what situation we may be in, we must be connected to the energy that we're giving off. So we can do really uncomfortable jobs without being negative. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna share this story with you about that, because gratitude is an energy that attracts more things to be grateful for. So I want to share this story. So as mentioned, I was homeless for a while, living out of my car. And to survive, to eat, I would go to what's called the labor pool. And the labor pool is where you have ex-convicts and homeless people. They come to this place and they'll get these little odd jobs, and they may make, $5 an hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but at least you can make some money, right, to eat. So I go to the labor hall to find a job, just so I could get some food to eat. Well, I went several days in a row, and I didn't get picked to go out on a job. So I had no money, no food. I was hungry. And I had began studying this spiritual stuff, right? This law of attraction or whatever. And so I'm sitting up late one night and I'm having a prayer. And I said, God, okay, look, I just need a job today so I can get my little 15, 20 bucks so I can eat. I said, so whatever job you're willing to give me, I'm willing to do it. But I just need a job tomorrow. When I go in, I'm praying that I will get a job. So I go in the labor hall the next morning. And this is like 5 a.m, right? So I go into the labor hall and I sit down. I wasn't there for 2 minutes and the guy just points at me. He says, hey, you, come here. He says, you have a car? I said, yes. He said, great. He gives me a ticket for the job. So I'm driving down the road. Number one, I realized that God had answered my prayer. I had a job. I was going to get some money. So I drive to the job, and it happens to be one of those porta potty companies, those portable toilet companies.
Mm-hmm.
And my job was to clean them. Okay. So I pull in, I look around, I go, oh. Dang. So the guy who I pull up to now, again, he deals with, like I said, homeless people, ex-convicts or whatever. So he's got a really negative attitude anyway.
Yeah.
So he comes up to me, he grabs my ticket. He says, okay, here's what I need you to do. He takes me out there. He gives me this raincoat, a hose, a mop, a bucket. He says, I need you to clean out these portable toilets. And he's a real jackass, to be honest. So anyway, I'm sitting there and I'm going, ooh, damn, do I really need this money that bad? Do I really want to do this? And I said, oops, God, I promise that if you gave me a job, I would do whatever you gave me, right? So I'm sitting here, I'm cleaning these toilets, and I'm smiling. I'm counting my blessings that I have a job,
One
right?
by one, yep.
Now, all of a sudden, it begins to rain. And I'm not talking just rain. I'm talking torrential downpour, right? So I go inside to the guy. I said, hey, man, can I wait until it stops raining? He says, no, you need to finish those now because they have to go out very quickly. That's why I gave you a raincoat. So I'm in the rain, cleaning out a freaking portable toilet with a smile on my face. God, thank you. Thank you for this job.
Gratitude.
Did I like it? Of course not. But I was grateful. I was grateful for the job. So I did that for 8 hours, right? And it rained for probably 5 of those hours. So I go back to work. I get my little check. It's like $45 or whatever. I'm smiling because number one, I get to eat. I sleep in my car. I get up the next day to go to the labor pool again. I sit down. The same guy, he says, hey, you got a car, right?
You got a car. I know you got a car.
Yeah, he points to me because a lot of the guys don't have cars, right? So they can't go to the job. So he goes, come here. He gives me a ticket. So I go to this job, and it's in this really fancy office building that they're building, brand new office building, right? So I go in, complete opposite experience. The foreman comes over. He says, Michael, welcome. He says, here, this is what I need you to do. Now, it just so happens that my background is in building materials and electrical. And so here I am. I'm supposed to be cleaning stuff, but one of the electricians needed some help. And I just happened to walk over and I said, look, I know how to do that. He said, do you really? I said, yeah. He says, great, can you do it? So I helped this guy all day. And the guy was so impressed that the electrician hired me full time.
Just like cleaning the garage back when you were 14. I can do that.
So my point here is for that person who is in that job that they hate, the first thing they've got to do is clean up that energy. The first thing they've got to do is learn to find something to be grateful for, no matter how much they may not like being there.
Yeah.
Because until they shift that energy, nothing is going to change for them. So an attitude of gratitude is the simplest way to begin shifting that energy, begin shifting who you are. Because again, you don't attract what you want, you attract who you are. So a lot of people say, I want to make more money. Well, if you don't resonate inside with the I am good enough to have more money, I love myself for who I am, I deserve, if you don't have that energy, you'll never attract more money to you. You'll never attract a better position. It all begins with you. It begins with the attitude of gratitude. So be grateful for wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And the more you're grateful, the more you'll attract things to be grateful for.
Forgiveness, love, and gratitude.
There you go.
Coach Michael, where can they find you?
Simplest way is coachmichaeltaylor.com. You can find out all about my work and books and everything right there. coachmichaeltaylor.com.
Coach Michael Taylor, one more question. You've already answered it. Why do you work?
Why do I work? Because I believe that I am simply a divine manifestation of the infinite intelligence that created this amazing universe that we live in. And so as this manifestation, as this divine expression of the universe, it is my responsibility to share my unique gifts and talents with the world to make it a better place. And that's why I work.
And I believe that you're doing that, Coach Michael Taylor. I appreciate you, and I hope you all the best. And I would like to talk to you again sometime.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Talk to you later.